the air of forgotten things. The town of Ravensworth was small, quiet, and unremarkable until you looked closer. Every creaking door, every weathered building, seemed to hold secrets waiting to be uncovered. As Mia Weston drove through its mist-covered streets, the town seemed more like an echo than a place. An echo of something that had long since been forgotten. Mia wasn't new to dealing with the unseen. As a psychologist specializing in memory therapy, she had spent the last few years unlocking the doors of people's minds, helping them retrieve memories they had lost. The cutting-edge procedure she used, known as memory reconstruction, allowed her patients to experience lost moments, to relive fragmented pieces of their lives as though they were really there. But this was different. This town, Ravensworth, had a pulse. It felt like the memories here weren't just hidden, they were buried, silently waiting for someone to disturb them. The weather was dreary, clouds hanging low in the sky, blocking out the weak light of the afternoon. A fog lingered, stretching its fingers across the narrow streets like a watchful presence. Mia pulled into a small parking lot in front of an old brick building. The sign above the door read Ravensworth Psychological Services, its letters faded with time. She felt a flicker of hesitation, but pushed it down. She wasn't here for sightseeing. She was here for answers, for the patients who needed her expertise. Today, however, would be her first time in this town, and she didn't expect it to be just like any other. The first patient inside, the waiting room smelled of old books, the kind of place where the passage of time seemed to freeze. The faint scent of incense mixed with the smell of antique wood, and the low hum of the air conditioner was the only sound that filled the otherwise quiet space. Her receptionist, Lynn, greeted her with a smile, though Mia could tell something was off. Lynn's eyes darted nervously to the clock on the wall, and the quick glance she gave. Mia suggested she was more nervous than normal. "Dr. Weston," Lynn said, her voice a little too high-pitched. "You're early. I didn't want to keep anyone waiting," Mia replied, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Lynn nodded quickly, her hand shaking slightly as she adjusted her glasses. "He's waiting for you. Room 3. Mia followed the woman down the hallway, the old floorboards creaking beneath her weight. The doors to the therapy rooms were all closed, and as she walked past them, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The air felt heavy, as though it carried 1,000 forgotten thoughts. Room 3 was at the end of the hall. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, a man sat in a chair, his back stiff, his fingers intertwined on his lap. He was in his mid-40s, with a clean-cut look and piercing blue eyes. The way he sat, rigid and unyielding, reminded Mia of a man who had seen things, a man who was trying desperately to forget what he had witnessed. "Mr. Jones?" Mia asked, her voice gentle but professional. He looked up at her, his eyes unreadable. "Yes? He paused, swallowing as though gathering himself. "I need your help." Mia smiled kindly and gestured toward the chair across from him. "Please, take your time. You can start whenever you're ready, Mr." Jones sat in silence for a moment, staring at his hands as though they might hold the answers. Finally, his voice came, low and tinged with a strange urgency. "I can't remember the last year of my life. I'm not sure what happened, but I know it's something bad. Something I need to forget." Mia nodded, already feeling the weight of his words sink into her bones. He wasn't just asking for a normal therapy session. He was asking for something deeper. "Tell me what you do remember," she said, leaning forward slightly, taking her usual professional tone. But there was something in his eyes, something desperate, something that made Mia feel like she was walking into a trap. "I remember everything up until last October," Mr. Jones continued. "Then, it's like there's a wall. I can't recall any of the memories. It's all just blank. I don't know how it happened, but I can feel something pulling at me. Something dark." Mia's heart skipped a beat. She had dealt with patients before who had amnesia or who had suffered from memory suppression, but this felt different. The terror in his eyes was palpable, as though he feared the answer would be worse than the unknown. "That's what I'm here for, Mr. Jones," she said softly. "I'm going to help you retrieve those memories." But even as the words left her mouth, she felt a shiver run down her spine. What if something else was out there, manipulating the memories? What if someone or something had erased his memories on purpose? The first step into the unknown. Over the next few hours, Mia began the first session of memory reconstruction. She used a neural simulation technique to guide Mr. Jones back into the moment when his memory started to fade. The process was carefully controlled, designed to awaken hidden parts of the mind. The room grew cold, and the air around them seemed to thicken. As Mr. Jones began to recall fragments of the year he'd lost, his voice faltered. I was at a party," he murmured. People the first didn't recognize. They were looking at me, smiling. But something was wrong. It felt wrong. Mia's eyes narrowed. She took notes, but her instincts told her something was off. The way he described the people, the look in his eyes, it wasn't just a forgotten memory. It felt like he was describing something more sinister. "Go on," Mia urged, her voice calm but firm. Suddenly, his face turned pale. He gasped and gripped the armrests of the chair. "No, stop! I don't want to remember. I don't want to see it again." Mia jumped up, her hand reaching for his shoulder. But the moment she touched him, the room went dark. The world around them shifted. The walls seemed to stretch, and the sound of whispers flooded her mind. Something was wrong. Before she could react, she saw an image that she could not explain. In the swirling darkness, there was a shadowed figure standing at the edge of the room. A figure with hollow eyes, staring directly at her. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying. This was no ordinary memory. This was a warning, and it was coming for her. Episode 2, Echoes in the Mind. The darkening path. The air in Ravensworth had taken on an unnatural chill. It was the kind of cold that didn't just seep into your skin but wrapped around your bones, as though the very town itself was watching and waiting. As Mia Weston sat at her desk in the small office of Ravensworth Psychological Services, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had crossed a line. The case of Mr. James Jones, the first patient to suffer from the mysterious amnesia, had unsettled her more than she was willing to admit. The void in his memories wasn't something she could easily explain away. It wasn't like any of the typical memory suppression cases she had dealt with before. No, this was something much darker. As she stared at the files in front of her, her fingers grazed the surface of the patient's record, a chill running down her spine. What had happened to him? What had he forgotten? The deeper she tried to dig into his mind, the more she felt like someone or something was actively keeping those memories from surfacing. The whispers she had heard during his session still echoed in her mind. Were they just a side effect of the memory reconstruction technique? Or was something more sinister at play? She had to find out. She had to know. Her phone buzzed on the desk, dragging her from her thoughts. It was a message from Lynn, the receptionist. "Lynn, another patient coming in today. This one is strange. Call me when you're free," Mia frowned. Strange? That word had an unsettling way of sticking in her mind. She felt herself tense up. The last thing she needed was another patient with an unexplainable problem. But if this was anything like the last case, she couldn't afford to back away. With a sigh, Mia stood up and walked to the waiting room. She had to prepare herself for whatever was about to unfold. A new arrival. As Mia entered the waiting area, she saw the man sitting in the corner, staring blankly ahead. His eyes empty, hollow, like he hadn't truly seen anything for years. He didn't even acknowledge her presence as she approached. He looked young, barely in his mid-20s, but there was something about his demeanor that made him seem older, as if he had lived through decades of torment. He wore a worn jacket and jeans, his hands trembling slightly as they rested in his lap. "Mr. Cole?" Mia asked, her voice calm but carrying the weight of her growing unease. The man looked up at her slowly, his gaze unfocused at first, then sharpening as he seemed to recognize her. "Yes," he murmured, his voice raw and hoarse. "I need your help. I can't remember. I can't remember my own name." The words hit Mia harder than she expected. This wasn't just memory loss, it was something deeper, something unnatural. "Let's get you settled in," Mia said, her mind racing as she led him into the therapy room. Another case of missing memories. But the sense of foreboding was growing. There was something much more unnerving about this one. Echoes in the mind. As Mia prepared for the session, she studied her new patient, Elliot Cole. His eyes still had that far-off look, but they were watchful, like he was constantly expecting something to happen. Mia asked him to lie back, asking him to take deep breaths, and guided him through her memory reconstruction technique. This time, however, something was different. The room temperature dropped, and the lights flickered briefly, but it wasn't enough to interrupt the process. Mia focused on the screen in front of her, adjusting the neural simulation device that would allow Elliot to tap into the recesses of his mind. She made sure the settings were correct, adjusted the intensity, and then the strange sensation began. It started with a whisper, soft at first, just on the edge of hearing. Then it grew like a low hum, vibrating through the walls, filling the room. Elliot's expression changed, his body tensing as though he was struggling against something. "Elliot?" Mia asked gently. "Focus on your breathing. Let the memories come back, one at a time." But he didn't respond. His breathing quickened, his fingers twitching, his muscles rigid. And then the whispers changed. They weren't just voices anymore, they were images. Flashing scenes filled Mia's vision, too fast for her to catch each detail. A shadow lurking at the edge of the woods, a door slamming shut, and a figure standing in the distance, someone familiar, but distorted. Elliot let out a strangled gasp, and his eyes flew open. No, that's not. Suddenly, the images became clearer. Mia saw flashes of something dark, a room, a locked door, and something, or someone, watching. The voice of the memory weaver was there, faint but clear in the background, whispering, "You can't escape. None of you can." Before Mia could process the visions, Elliot bolted upright, his face pale. "I saw it. I saw them. The shadows. The people. They were trying to pull me in. No, I." His words became frantic, desperate. "I don't want to remember." Mia grabbed his arm gently but firmly. "Elliot, focus. It's important that you try to recall what's happened. What do you remember? Tell me everything." But Elliot was already shaking his head, his breaths ragged. "I can't. They're coming for me." The shadows of the past. Mia was about to ask him more questions when the room suddenly darkened, the temperature plummeting. The shadows in the corners of the room grew longer, darker, and began to take on shape, a form emerging from the edge of her vision. "Get out of my head," Elliot screamed, his voice breaking. The room began to warp, as if the walls themselves were bending around them. The shadows were alive, and Mia could feel them tightening, closing in on her. The temperature dropped even further, and the air turned thick with a feeling of dread. Mia tried to stay calm, but the pressing weight of the darkness was suffocating. The whispers, the creaking sound, the feeling of being watched, it was as if the entire town was bearing down on them, its very foundation crumbling under the pressure of forgotten memories. Before she could react, Elliot collapsed back into the chair, his face drained of color. His body went limp, his eyes vacant, as though the light inside him had been extinguished. Mia was frozen. She couldn't understand what had just happened. The simulation was supposed to help him remember, but it had done the opposite. It had pulled him deeper into whatever darkness lurked beneath his memories. The shadows in the corners of the room began to move again. And this time, they weren't just in the mind. Episode 3. The Tapestry of Pain. The fraying threads. Mia stood in front of the worn wooden door to her office, the air around her thick with a palpable sense of unease. Ravensworth had never felt so suffocating. The whispers, the shadows, the strange occurrences, everything was becoming harder to ignore. Ever since she had encountered the memory weaver and its dark influence, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was following her, watching her every move. The calm, controlled psychologist she once was seemed to be slipping away, piece by piece. She had become entangled in something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. As she walked into her office, she noticed the room felt colder than usual. Her breath misted in front of her, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally along the walls. Her patient records were scattered across the desk. Every name, every case, now felt like part of a twisted puzzle. But the faces of the patients were beginning to blur. The more she looked at them, the more she felt like she was slipping into someone else's memories. And that was the most terrifying part. Her hand brushed over the open file in front of her, the photograph of a woman's face staring back at her. It was one of her earliest patients, Sophia Marsh, who had been missing for weeks after a therapy session had gone wrong. The file was riddled with notes, observations, and clinical data, but there was something missing, something important. She couldn't remember the last time she saw Sophia. It was as though that memory had been wiped from her mind. The first broken memory. The silence in her office was interrupted by the familiar hum of the phone ringing. Mia hesitated for a moment before picking it up, her fingers trembling slightly. "Dr. Weston?" A voice came through, shaky and breathless. Mia didn't recognize the voice immediately, but something about it sounded familiar, hauntingly familiar. "I need your help. It's happening again." The word sent a cold shiver down her spine. "Who is this?" Mia asked, her voice steady but tight with an unshakable tension. "Sophia. Sophia Marsh." Mia's heart skipped a beat. The name hit her like a punch to the gut. Sophia Marsh, the woman she had been researching. The one who had disappeared. She had no memory of seeing Sophia since the incident, but now here she was, alive and asking for help. "Sophia? Where are you? What's happening?" Mia asked, trying to keep her voice calm, but inside her pulse raced. She could feel the ground slipping beneath her. "I don't know where I am. It's like I'm stuck in someone else's memory. Everything's fading and I can't." The phone went dead, the line cutting off with a horrible finality. Mia stared at the receiver in her hand, her mind racing. Was it a prank? Or had Sophia truly contacted her from the other side of her memories? Was the memory weaver involved? Or had it already begun to erode everything around her? Unraveling the truth, determined to find answers, Mia immediately set out to locate Sophia. But the deeper she delved into the investigation, the more she began to notice something strange. The townspeople spoke of Sophia's disappearance as though it had never happened, like she had never existed. Mia's colleagues, too, seemed unaware of her past connection with Sophia. Even the police report had been mysteriously altered. The final report, the one Mia had been given by the local authorities, listed Sophia's case as an unsolved missing person case, but it wasn't the full report. The details of the incident, the information that had connected Mia to Sophia, were gone. Mia wasn't sure if she was losing her mind or if someone was actively trying to erase her involvement. Either way, the pattern was beginning to emerge. The memory weaver was erasing the past, and it was coming for her. Her mind felt like it was constantly slipping, memories of patients blending with her own fragmented thoughts. She couldn't remember where she'd been the night of the phone call, couldn't remember if she had left her office. The walls felt like they were closing in, pressing down on her. Every corner she turned seemed to lead to another shadow, another whispering presence. Mia's instincts told her to go back to the library, the place where she had first uncovered the files of those lost souls. But even the thought of stepping back into that place sent a wave of nausea through her. The library had always been a haven of knowledge, but now it felt like a trap. What had she missed? What had she overlooked in the records? A descent into madness that night. Mia couldn't sleep. Her mind was racing, and her thoughts felt like they were spiraling out of control. She couldn't shake the image of Sophia's face, staring at her from the file eyes full of fear and desperation. There was something in her eyes that Mia couldn't place, a warning, a message that was slowly unraveling in the back of her mind. The clock on her nightstand ticked relentlessly, each second echoing in her ears like a countdown. Mia couldn't escape the growing feeling that time was running out. She could feel the walls of the house pressing in on her, the whispers growing louder. The same whisper that had been in her patient's memories, now in her own mind. "You're running out of time, Mia. You can't stop it. It's too late." The voice seemed to come from nowhere, a chilling whisper that crawled under her skin, settling into her thoughts. Was it the memory weaver? Was it the manifestation of all the forgotten souls, trying to warn her or drag her into its endless web? The confrontation. With a rising sense of dread, Mia gathered the courage to go to the library. She couldn't let the weaver consume her too. She needed answers. The deeper she dug, the more she realized how intertwined her life was with the cursed town. She had always thought she was in control of her patients, of their memories. But now, she was the one caught in the web. As she stepped into the library, the air was thick with dust and unspoken truths. The smell of old books filled her nostrils, and she could almost hear the whispers of those who had once been there, their memories lingering like ghosts. The library had changed. It was darker now, more oppressive, as though the memory weaver's influence had taken root. Mia walked down the aisles of bookshelves, feeling like she was being watched. Every step seemed to lead her closer to something she wasn't sure she was ready to find. But then, her eyes landed on the book that had been there all along, hidden behind the others. It wasn't in the records, but she knew it was the key to everything. As she opened it, the pages were filled with names, hundreds of names, all crossed out. But one name remained at the bottom of the list, untouched: Mia Weston. The room seemed to sway around her, and the shadows seemed to come alive, curling around her. She wasn't just reading a history of the town's lost souls. She was reading her own fate. Episode 4. breaking the fabric, a sudden awakening. Mia couldn't remember the last time she'd felt truly safe. The unsettling silence in the air, the weight of every forgotten memory pressing down on her mind. It was all too much. As she sat in her office, late into the night, the usual hum of the city outside seemed strangely distant, almost like the world had stopped turning. The soft glow of the desk lamp flickered, and the shadows on the walls seemed to stretch unnaturally, like they were alive. She had just finished reading the final report on Sophia Marsh, and something was gnawing at her, pulling at the very fabric of her thoughts. Sophia's disappearance, the twisted memories that had begun to surface, the growing sense that Mia's own life was part of a larger design, it was all starting to weigh her down. The whispers had returned, louder this time, echoing in the back of her mind. You can't break it. You are the key. Mia clenched her fists, trying to shut the voice out, but it lingered. It always did. She had tried to ignore it, to focus on her work, but now she understood she was more than just a victim. She was part of the curse, and it was coming for her. She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor, her pulse racing. The walls felt like they were closing in. The memory weaver was real, and it was tied to something ancient, something that Mia couldn't yet fully comprehend. She knew that she had to face it or risk losing herself entirely. The first crack in reality, Mia's thoughts, were interrupted by the ringing of her phone. The sound felt jarring, sharp against the stillness of the room. She reached for it, her hands trembling as she answered. Dr. Weston? The voice on the other end was familiar. Lynn, the receptionist from her office. But there was something in her tone that sent a cold shiver down Mia's spine. There's something wrong, Lynn said, her voice strained. I think we need to talk. You need to see this. Before Mia could respond, the line went dead. A feeling of unease settled over her like a thick blanket. Lynn had never been one to get rattled, and the way she'd spoken sent Mia into a panic. Was this another patient? Another victim of the weaver's twisted games? Mia grabbed her coat and ran out the door, the cold wind biting at her skin as she headed for the office. The town felt different now, like it was watching her, like the very streets she'd walked on for weeks had shifted, become something unfamiliar, something dangerous. She felt the weight of something ancient pressing down on her as she walked through the fog-covered streets of Ravensworth. The unraveling. When Mia arrived at the office, Lynn was waiting by the door, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. The usual lightness that Mia had come to associate with the receptionist was gone, replaced by a sense of utter dread. Lynn, what's going on? Mia asked, her voice sharp. What did you mean by you need to see this? Lynn hesitated for a moment, her hand shaking as she pointed to a stack of patient files on the desk. Mia's eyes widened as she took in the names, the faces. But it wasn't just the familiar patients, there was Sophia Marsh, her name scribbled across the top of the page. What is this? Mia asked, a sense of unease growing in her chest. Lynn bit her lip, taking a step back. It's all of them, Dr. Weston. All the patients you've helped. They've vanished. And I think I know why. Mia's mind raced. What did Lynn mean? How could they have vanished? The tapestries of memories, the lost lives that she had so carefully pieced together, gone. Lynn pulled open the drawer of the filing cabinet, revealing a hidden compartment one Mia had never noticed before. Inside were more files, old, frayed, and yellowed with age. At the top of the pile was a name that sent a chill through Mia's veins. Mia Weston. Lynn caught Mia's gaze, her voice trembling as she spoke. It's your name, Dr. Weston. You're part of this. You've always been part of it. The tapestry. Mia felt the world around her begin to shift. She could hear the whispers now, louder than ever before, almost suffocating her. Her breathing quickened as she grabbed the file and began to flip through the papers. What she found made her stomach drop. The records of her own life, her memories were distorted, like someone had altered them. There were no details, no clear timeline. And as she read on, the names of her past patients, the memories she had worked so hard to reconstruct, they were all intertwined with her own. This isn't possible, Mia whispered, her heart racing. How could this be? Lynn's eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else in them now, a dark realization. It's not just the patients, Mia. It's you. You were always meant to be a part of this cycle. The memory weaver was always watching. Mia turned to face her, her thoughts scattered. The room began to spin. Was this the end? Was she truly the one meant to break the cycle? Or was she doomed to become just another forgotten soul? Confronting the weaver suddenly, the temperature dropped, and the shadows around her grew longer. The walls seemed to stretch, and the room appeared to darken. Mia tried to move, but her legs felt like they were made of stone. The memory weaver was here. The air felt charged with a strange, oppressive force. The shadows in the corners of the room began to take form, coalescing into the shape of a figure tall, unnaturally thin, its face hidden in shadow. "You can never escape Mia Weston," the figure intoned, its voice a deep, hollow whisper that reverberated through the walls. Mia stepped back, panic rising in her chest. "No, I won't be your prisoner. Not like the others. You cannot break the fabric of time," the figure replied, its voice cold and knowing. "Your memories, your life, they are part of the tapestry. And now, they belong to me." Mia's heart pounded as she realized the full extent of the horror. She wasn't just being watched. She was being woven into the very fabric of this nightmare. And if she didn't find a way to break free, she would be lost, like the others before her. The final choice, in that moment of terror, Mia knew what she had to do. She couldn't run. She couldn't hide. The only way out was to destroy the weaver, to sever the connection between herself and the curse that had bound Ravensworth for so long. She clenched her fists, her body shaking with fear and adrenaline. She didn't know how, but she knew one thing for certain: the weaver was not going to take her without a fight. With a final, steadying breath, Mia faced the dark figure, her voice unwavering. "I will end this, or die trying." Episode 5. The last thread of fractured reality. The moment Mia stepped out of her office and into the streets of Ravensworth, she could feel the town pressing in on her. It wasn't the usual quiet, foggy atmosphere, it was something else. The air felt heavy, like the weight of every unspoken memory was hanging in the air, waiting to suffocate her. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Sophia Marsh, the missing patients, her own memories, everything felt like a nightmare. But the nightmare wasn't just in her head. It was in the town itself. The memory weaver was real, and it was weaving its dark threads into her very existence. Every step she took felt like a betrayal. Every corner she turned seemed to lead to another dark, uncharted part of her life, parts of her past she had never remembered, but now couldn't forget. She could feel the presence of the weaver in every shadow, every whisper in the wind, every fleeting image that passed by her vision. The mysterious phone call from Lynn had made it clear something was wrong. Lynn had never been the one to show fear, yet her voice on the phone had been shaken, frantic. And the patient files that Mia had found, the ones that tied her into the town's cursed history, had been enough to make her question everything. But now, in the streets of Ravensworth, as she walked toward the library, Mia could feel the darkness lurking just out of sight. She didn't know where it was coming from, or what exactly it wanted, but it was clear. She couldn't avoid it any longer. The Library of Forgotten Souls. The library loomed ahead, its towering stone structure looking more like a prison than a place of knowledge. Mia had been there before, but this time it felt different. The shadows cast by the building stretched unnaturally long, and the front door, which usually creaked with the weight of the past, stood ajar. With hesitant steps, Mia crossed the threshold, the air growing colder the deeper she ventured. The library felt almost alive. Each book and memory it contained seemed to whisper in unison, as if the walls themselves were remembering things Mia had never known. She had spent hours here before, combing through patient files, uncovering old records. But now, every piece of information felt like a trap, each new clue pulling her deeper into the memory weaver's grasp. As Mia made her way down the aisles, the familiar rustling of pages was eerily absent. Instead, there was a low hum, the sound of something shifting, the vibrations echoing through the stacks of books. She couldn't shake the feeling that the library was watching her, the threat of the past. A voice broke through the silence, soft and almost unrecognizable. Mia turned toward the source, her pulse quickening. Mia. She spun around, her heart hammering in her chest. Standing in front of her was Sophia Marsh, the missing patient. But it wasn't the woman Mia remembered. This was someone else. Someone different. Sophia's face was pale, her eyes hollow, as if she had seen things no one should ever have to see. She was dressed in the same clothes Mia had seen in the hospital records, but there was an unnatural stillness about her. "You shouldn't be here," Sophia whispered, her voice shaking. It's already begun. Mia opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. 1,000 questions swirled in her mind, but they all seemed to disappear when she looked at Sophia. Sophia reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched Mia's arm. "You're part of it. You've always been part of it." The words hit Mia like a physical blow. She stepped back, but Sophia followed, her movements almost ghostly. "I don't understand," Mia gasped. "What do you mean?" Sophia's eyes were wide with terror as she whispered, "You've been chosen. The Weaver needs you. You are the final thread." Before Mia could respond, Sophia screamed, a high-pitched sound that sent a shockwave through the room. Books fell off the shelves, the walls seemed to close in, and the room began to spin. Mia stumbled, clutching her head, as the world around her seemed to warp. The shadows that had been lurking in the corners of the room suddenly surged forward, closing in on her, their forms shifting and morphing as they took shape, becoming figures, faces, lost memories. Mia gasped for breath, her vision blurring as the room seemed to collapse in on itself. She could hear the whispers again, louder now, like 1,000 voices speaking in unison. "You are the key, Mia, the key to breaking it all." Suddenly, the shadows converged on her, wrapping around her body in a suffocating embrace. Mia screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. She couldn't see, couldn't think, only feel the tug of the memories trying to pull her deeper into the Weaver's web. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The room went silent. The shadows vanished. Mia collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. The unraveling truth, Mia's mind spun with the implications of what had just happened. Sophia was gone, and the library was once again still eerily so. But the weight of what Sophia had said lingered in her mind. "You're part of it. The Weaver needs you." Mia stood shakily, her legs threatening to give out. She wasn't sure what had just happened. Was it a vision? A hallucination? Or was it real? But one thing was certain. The Memory Weaver was real, and it was now hunting her. She had no choice but to keep moving forward. Every second felt like a countdown to something she couldn't stop. She walked deeper into the library, the weight of the past pressing on her every step. The books around her seemed to shift, their titles blurring, but then she saw a book on the top shelf that caught her attention. It wasn't a book she had ever seen before. Mia pulled it down, her hands shaking as she opened the first page. The words written inside were familiar, like a memory she should have remembered. They were her words, "Mia Weston, you will be the one to break the weave. But beware, there is no way out without sacrifice." The message was clear. She was trapped. There was no escape from the Memory Weaver. And whatever path she chose, it would come with a price. The choice. Mia slammed the book shut, feeling her pulse quicken. The walls of the library seemed to close in on her again, but this time she didn't run. She couldn't run anymore. She had to face it, confront whatever dark force was controlling her fate. She was the final thread in the Weaver's tapestry, and whether she liked it or not, she had a role to play. The question was, would she become part of the Weaver's design, or would she be the one to tear it apart? Mia felt her heartbeat in her throat. The choice was hers, but the consequences were beyond her understanding, and the clock was ticking. Episode 6. A World of Broken Dreams. The weight of forgotten memories. Mia awoke to the familiar, hollow silence of Ravensworth. The eerie fog clung to the streets like a memory that refused to fade, and the oppressive stillness was beginning to feel like a living entity. Every morning since she had first entered the town, it had felt like time itself was stretched thin, as if something was constantly pushing against the flow of her life. She sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers pressed against her forehead as the aftershocks of last night's events still rattled through her. The visions, the whispers, everything was blending into a nightmare that Mia couldn't escape. It felt like she was losing herself, like she was sinking into a dream she didn't want to be in. The library, the old files, Sophia's haunting words. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she had been living in the shadow of something far darker than she could have ever imagined. The town of Ravensworth wasn't just cursed. It was built on lies, and her memories were at the very center of it all. She grabbed her coat and walked out into the cold morning air, the mist swirling around her like ghosts whispering secrets from the past. Each step she took felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of the forgotten memories of the town and her own past was pulling her deeper into its suffocating embrace. The mirror's reflection at the center of Ravensworth stood the old town clock tower. looming like a monument to time itself. The clock ticked with the precision of a memory long forgotten, steady and unwavering, yet strangely unpredictable. As Mia walked toward the square, she couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, and she had no idea how much longer she could hold on. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her from her thoughts. She pulled it out, her heart skipping a beat as she saw a message from Lynn. "Lynn, I think I found something. Meet me at the clock tower. We need to talk." Mia didn't hesitate. She turned on her heel and made her way toward the towering structure. The air felt colder as she approached, the clock's steady tick-tock sending a low, unsettling hum through her bones. As she reached the entrance, she noticed that the door, which had always been locked, was now ajar. She pushed it open, the sound of the creaking door echoing down the hallway, and found Lynn waiting inside, her face pale, eyes wide with terror. "What's going on, Lynn?" Mia asked, trying to mask the unease in her voice. Lynn didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped aside, motioning for Mia to follow her deeper into the tower. They walked up the spiraling stairs, the old wood groaning beneath their feet. When they reached the top, Mia's gaze immediately fell upon a large cracked mirror leaning against the wall. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. The reflection in the glass wasn't right distorted, as if something or someone was twisting the image. "Mia," Lynn whispered, her voice trembling. "Look at the mirror, you'll see it too." Mia's stomach twisted as she stepped closer to the mirror. At first, her reflection seemed normal, but as she focused on it, she began to notice subtle changes. Her eyes, they were no longer her own. They were darker, hollow, empty. Her reflection was smiling, but it was not a smile Mia recognized. It wasn't her. Mia recoiled, taking a step back. "What is this? What's happening?" Lynn grabbed her arm, her grip tight with desperation. "Mia, you're losing yourself. The memories, the town, they're all part of it. The memory weaver is weaving you into its tapestry." Mia shook her head, her thoughts spiraling. "No, this isn't real. It can't be. You're not just a victim, Mia. You're part of the cycle. You've been here before." The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just trapped in Ravensworth, she was entwined with it. The memories weaver had been pulling her strings all along. It wasn't just a force, it was a reflection of herself, her own fears and forgotten past shaping the town around her. The truth beneath the surface. The walls of the clock tower began to shift, the space warping around them. The air grew thicker, like something was pressing against them from all sides. Mia stumbled back, her mind racing as she tried to process what Lynn had just said. Before she could speak, Lynn was already moving toward a hidden door on the far side of the room. Mia followed, her footsteps slow as she tried to steady her breath. Lynn opened the door to reveal a darkened room filled with old bookshelves, their shelves sagging under the weight of decaying tomes. The air was thick with dust, and something else, something that made Mia's skin crawl. She could feel it, a presence in the room, like something was watching them from the shadows. Lynn led her to a large wooden desk, covered with papers, parchment, and what looked like ancient ritualistic symbols. At the center of the desk was an old journal, its pages worn and stained with time. "This is it," Lynn whispered. "This is what I've been trying to warn you about." Mia picked up the journal, her hands trembling as she opened it. The first page was filled with strange symbols, lines of text that seemed to shift as her eyes scanned them. The further she read, the clearer the meaning became. "This is..." Mia trailed off, her heart racing as she read aloud. "The memory weaver's legacy. It's been passed down through generations. The one who is chosen becomes a part of the tapestry. We are trapped, forever." Lynn nodded, her voice shaking. "You're the final thread. You were chosen, Mia. But there's one thing no one tells you. The weaver doesn't let go, not unless it has everything." Mia slammed the journal shut, her mind racing. She had been wrong. This wasn't just about breaking free. The weaver was inside her. The truth she had been searching for was within her, and the price for her escape would be far worse than death. The looming presence suddenly, the room grew unbearably dark. The shadows seemed to come alive, creeping across the walls and floor, suffocating the light. Mia could feel something stirring in the air, a presence she knew all too well. It was here, the memory weaver. "Mia, listen to me," Lynn said, her voice trembling. "The only way out is to destroy the thread. You have to unweave it." But Mia already knew. She could feel the weaver's presence, could feel it tightening around her throat, threatening to choke the life out of her. With a shaky breath, Mia closed her eyes. She had to make a choice. She had to tear it down. The world around her seemed to crumble as she reached out and touched the journal once more. The final thread was unraveling. Episode 7, The Return of the Forgotten. The return of the forgotten Ravensworth had always been a town that seemed to exist on the edge of reality. A place where time itself felt fragile. Every moment felt like it could unravel with a single wrong step. Mia had spent the last few weeks chasing fragments of memories, hoping to piece together some semblance of her past. But the more she learned, the more the truth eluded her. Her thoughts felt like broken glass, shards of memories that didn't fit together. The memory weaver had entangled her life in ways she couldn't fully understand. With each passing day, she felt herself being drawn deeper into its web, like an insect caught in an invisible thread, pulled toward an inevitable end. The town, once so familiar, now felt like a strange puzzle. Each building, each street, a piece that didn't quite align with the rest. The fog that rolled through the streets seemed to close in on her, and the shadows lurking in every corner felt like watchful eyes, waiting for her to slip. And then came the phone call. The forgotten call. Mia had barely gotten out of bed when her phone rang. She stared at it, her heart racing for a moment before she reached for it. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, and for a moment, she almost didn't answer. But then, something in the pit of her stomach told her she had no choice. Dr. Weston? The voice on the other end was a familiar one. Her heart skipped. It was Lynn, but it didn't sound like Lynn. Her voice was low, strained, almost unrecognizable. "Lynn?" Mia asked, trying to steady her breath. "What's going on?" I don't know what to do," Lynn's voice cracked. "It's him, Mia, the Weaver. I think he's using me now." The words hit Mia like a hammer. "What are you talking about? Where are you?" I'm at the library," Lynn whispered, her voice trembling. "You need to come. It's too late." "He's been here, Mia. He's been here for a long time." Before Mia could respond, the line went dead. The Library of Secrets. The library had always been a place of secrets, a place where forgotten things lingered. But as Mia approached it now, she could feel the heavy weight of dread pressing against her chest. The stone steps leading up to the old, creaking door felt like they were dragging her deeper into the ground with each step. The town had a way of pulling you back, of making you relive what you wanted to forget. Mia pushed open the door, the wood groaning in protest, and stepped inside. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the familiar scent of old books mixed with a sharp, metallic tang like blood. It wasn't just the smell of aged paper anymore. It was something more sinister, something alive. She called out, but no answer came. The silence was suffocating, the kind that made your skin crawl and your heart race. Her footsteps echoed down the dark, narrow hall, and she felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the place, eyes that weren't hers. "Mia?" A voice whispered from the darkness. It was Lynn, but it didn't sound like her at all. The voice was distant, distorted, as though coming from another place altogether. Mia's heart skipped a beat. "Lynn?" She moved forward, her legs shaking as she crossed the threshold into the main hall of the library. The walls seemed to close in on her, the shadows growing longer with each step. As she turned the corner, the flickering of a single light bulb caught her eye. It cast an eerie glow over the room, highlighting rows upon rows of ancient books and the broken glass of fractured memories. But it wasn't the books that caught her attention. It was Lynn, standing at the center of the room, her back to Mia. She was facing a large, ornate mirror, the same one Mia had seen in her own mind's eye during the terrifying visions. "Lynn?" Mia called, her voice barely above a whisper. Lynn slowly turned, and Mia froze. Her friend's eyes were empty, hollow, like a reflection of something lost. The expression on Lynn's face was vacant, but there was something else there, a darkness that Mia couldn't quite explain. She stepped back, a chill running down her spine. "Mia, it's time," Lynn said in that same distant voice, her body jerking as though not entirely under her own control. "The Weaver is waiting for you." Before Mia could react, the mirror began to crack, tiny fractures spreading across the glass like the weaving of a broken dream. The shards of the mirror seemed to pull in the light, creating a distorted image of the room, distorted, warped faces, memories of people who had long been forgotten. But one face stood out above all, Mia's own face, staring back at her from the depths of the glass. Mia's breath caught in her throat. Her reflection was smiling, but it wasn't the smile she recognized. It was a sinister grin, one that spoke of things far darker than she could comprehend. And then the voice echoed in her mind once more. "You cannot run." Mia's pulse thundered in her ears, and she took a step back, almost stumbling. She didn't know how much longer she could hold on. The memory weaver was closer than ever, pulling at the threads of her reality, weaving her memories into a nightmare she couldn't escape. The heart of the weaver. The ground beneath her feet began to tremble, and the shadows seemed to rise up, swirling around her. The bookshelves seemed to shift, the books on them flipping open by themselves, revealing pages of forgotten names, faces, and twisted visions. Mia could hear the whispers again, louder now. They weren't just in her head anymore. The voices were real. They were all around her, coming from every direction, wrapping themselves around her like a net. "You were never meant to remember." Mia spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice, but the room was full of shifting shadows. It felt like the walls themselves were closing in on her. Every inch of the library was now a maze of darkness, twisted reality, and broken fragments of her mind. She turned back to Lynn, whose form had become a blurry silhouette against the shattered mirror. Lynn's voice, once trembling and full of fear, now carried a cold, hollow certainty. "It's too late, Mia. You are the Weaver's creation." Mia's heart dropped. She had always felt like something was wrong with the town, like something was hidden beneath the surface. But she never imagined it would be this, her memories, her past, all tied to this place, to the Weaver. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about destroying what the Weaver had created, and the only way to do that was to unravel it piece by piece. But as Mia took a step toward the mirror, something stopped her. A cold hand gripped her wrist, pulling her back. It was Sophia, or at least, the version of her that had been warped by the Weaver's influence. Her eyes were wide, filled with terror. "Don't. You can't. It will consume you." Mia hesitated. Was Sophia trying to warn her? Or was this part of the Weaver's game? Either way, the path was becoming clear. The time for questions was over. Episode 8. The Shadow's Grip. The door to nowhere. Mia stood at the threshold of the abandoned house on the outskirts of Ravensworth, feeling the cold wind cut through her jacket like a blade. The house, shrouded in darkness, loomed before her like a forgotten relic from the past. She had been here once before, in the early days of her arrival in the town. The house had always felt like it was calling to her, but now its pull was unbearable. As she pushed open the creaking door, the stale air inside greeted her like an old friend, musty and heavy, as though it hadn't been disturbed in years. The floorboards groaned beneath her weight, and the faint smell of something decaying lingered in the air. The house wasn't just a house, it was a memory, a place where something had happened, and Mia was certain that whatever it was, it had something to do with the memory weaver. Inside, the walls seemed to close in around her, the oppressive weight of the darkness growing heavier with each step she took. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, as if the very space itself was alive, shifting with the passage of time. The house was alive, just as the weaver was. It fed on memories, consumed them, and breathed life into the forgotten corners of the world. Mia's heart pounded in her chest as she walked through the decaying hallway, past cracked mirrors and broken furniture, her breath quickening with each step. Sophia's warning echoed in her mind, "Don't, it will consume you." But Mia had already stepped beyond the point of no return. She couldn't turn back now. She had to know. The man in the mirror at the end of the hallway, she found it the mirror. The same mirror she had seen in her visions. The one that had haunted her dreams. The one that had distorted her reflection. The glass was shattered, the cracks running through it like veins. But through the jagged fragments, Mia could still see a reflection. It wasn't her own. The figure staring back at her was tall, shadowed, with eyes as dark as the void. Mia stepped closer, her breath catching in her throat as the figure moved not with her, but with its own purpose. The eyes locked onto hers, a chilling coldness radiating from them. "You should not have come here," a voice echoed from the mirror. It was low and ominous, like the murmur of someone speaking from the depths of the forgotten. Mia's pulse raced, and she felt the walls of the house closing in on her. The room seemed to distort, the air thick with the scent of something ancient and decaying. She couldn't breathe. Her chest tightened as the figure's dark gaze grew more intense, more invasive. "Who are you?" Mia asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain calm. The figure in the mirror smiled a twisted, cold smile that sent a jolt of terror through her body. "I am the shadow of the past," it said, its voice like gravel scraping against her mind. "I am the one who has always been with you." Suddenly the reflection shifted, and the figure's features blurred and changed, as though the memories themselves were morphing. In an instant, the shadow became a different face, Mia's face. But it wasn't her, not exactly. This reflection was empty, hollow, as though it had been drained of everything that made her human. "You've been here before, Mia," the voice continued, now whispering in her mind. "You've always been a part of this. The Weaver doesn't forget." Mia staggered back, her heart pounding so loudly she could feel the pressure in her ears. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. This isn't me." But the reflection in the shattered glass didn't listen. It only smiled, and Mia's body trembled in response. It was her face, but not her face. It was the memory Weaver. It had been hiding behind her eyes all along. The price of knowledge. Mia turned away from the mirror, her legs shaky as she struggled to regain her composure. The house seemed to shift again, the shadows growing deeper, more alive. The walls felt like they were closing in, pushing her toward the dark corner of the room. Her mind raced with the horrible realization. The Weaver wasn't just a curse, it was a force. It was in her, a part of her that had always been there, buried beneath the surface of her consciousness. It had fed on her, on the memories she had lost and the ones she had forgotten. But now it wanted something more. It wanted her soul. As Mia stepped forward, the floor beneath her shifted. A loud crack split the air, and the ground gave way, opening up into a dark pit below. She stumbled back, but before she could catch her balance, the shadows lunged, dragging her toward the abyss. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. Her body was pulled, dragged into the depths of the house, and the walls seemed to close in around her. Her breath quickened as she reached out, grasping for something, anything to stop her descent. But there was nothing. The darkness was all-encompassing, and she could feel it pulling her further into its grip, into the place where the Weaver's power was strongest. Mia was no longer just a victim, she was part of it, a thread woven into the fabric of a nightmare that had no end. The voice of the Weaver, when Mia finally landed, it wasn't with a crash, but a soft thud. She blinked, disoriented, her mind struggling to catch up. The room around her was dark, save for a faint, pulsating light in the corner. She could hear the whispering voices again, louder now, more urgent. "Mia," the voice called again, louder this time. It echoed in her head, a sound so familiar that it made her feel like she had always known it. The voice was calm, almost gentle, yet terrifying all the same. "It's time. Time to accept who you are. You have always been a part of this. You will always be part of the weave." Mia shook her head, trying to fight back the pull of the voice, but it was like the very air around her was weaving her thoughts together with the words. The walls of the room seemed to pulse, and the shadows began to take shape again. Slowly she stood, her legs weak but determined. "I won't be part of this anymore," she whispered, more to herself than to the dark presence. "I'll find a way out. I'll destroy you." The voice only laughed. "You cannot destroy what you are a part of," the voice said. "You are the last thread, and when the weave is complete, you will be lost to the darkness forever." Suddenly the light grew brighter, and Mia saw at the loom, a massive, ancient machine that seemed to pulse with life. The memory weaver was not just manipulating memories, it was weaving them, creating new threads, bending time itself to its will. Mia stepped forward, her resolve hardening. She had to break the loom, destroy it before it could trap her completely. But the loom was connected to everything she had ever known, everything she had forgotten. Episode 9, The Final Thread. The Awakening. The coldness of the night air bit into Mia's skin as she stood in front of the loom, the monstrous machine that had taken control of her fate. The hum of its gears filled the silence, a rhythmic sound that felt like the beating heart of something far older and more dangerous than anything she had encountered before. She had been here before, in her mind's eye, but this time it was real. This time, the loom was not just a symbol, it was a reality she couldn't escape. Every step Mia took toward the machine felt like a step closer to her own undoing. The closer she got, the more she felt the pull of the threads that bound her. Her mind raced as memories, both real and imagined, twisted together in a chaotic dance. Her pulse quickened, and the air around her thickened, filled with the weight of every forgotten soul the weaver had consumed. She wasn't just part of this world, she was part of the loom itself. It had been days since the last encounter with the shadows that haunted the library. Since then, Mia had been haunted by the knowledge that her own mind had been shattered, her memories fractured and distorted beyond recognition. She had hoped that by confronting the weaver, she could break free. But now, standing before the loom, Mia realized the truth. She wasn't just fighting for her freedom, she was fighting for her very soul. The loom's unraveling. The loom stood in the center of the chamber, massive and intricate, its spools of thread glowing with an unnatural light. Each thread seemed to pulse with life, moving in a delicate, almost hypnotic rhythm. But Mia knew better than to be fooled by its beauty. The loom wasn't just a tool, it was the prison, the mechanism that bound the weaver's influence to the very fabric of reality. A cold wind swept through the room, and Mia's breath came out in ragged gasps. She could feel the loom pulling at her, twisting her memories, distorting her perception of time and space. Every thread that wrapped around the loom had once been a part of her. Every choice she had ever made, every path she had ever walked, was now intertwined with the weaver's design. "You can't escape," a voice whispered, low and cold, rising from the shadows. It was Sophia, or at least it looked like her. Her face was hollow, her eyes empty, and she was standing by the loom, her figure barely visible in the dim light. Mia's heart skipped a beat. "Sophia?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" Sophia's empty eyes met hers, and for a moment there was nothing but silence. Then, Sophia's lips curled into a smile, one that was twisted, unnatural. "You were always meant to be part of this, Mia." Sophia's voice echoed through the room, each word dripping with darkness. "The loom has already woven you into its fabric. It's too late to break free now." Mia shook her head, her breath coming faster. "No, I won't let you do this. I won't become another one of your puppets." Sophia's smile faded, and she stepped closer to the loom, her fingers brushing against the glowing threads. "It's not my doing, Mia. It's the weaver's. And you are the final piece, the last thread. Without you, the cycle can never be complete." Mia could feel her legs begin to tremble. The loom was alive. It pulsed with power, and the more she looked at it, the more she realized that it wasn't just controlling her memories. It was controlling everything: the town, the people, and every shadow that lurked within the walls of Ravensworth. It was all part of the weaver's design. "No," Mia whispered, her voice hoarse. "I won't let it happen. I can't." The descent into darkness. Mia's mind reeled as she took another step toward the loom, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch one of the glowing threads. The moment her fingers brushed against it, a shock ran through her body, a searing pain that tore through her veins like fire. The world around her shifted, and for a split second, Mia was no longer standing in the loom room. She was somewhere else, a place that felt familiar, yet completely alien. The light around her dimmed, and she found herself standing in the middle of a long-forgotten memory. She was in a room, dark and musty, and there, standing before her, was a familiar figure, her father. "Mia?" he said softly, his voice full of warmth. But Mia could tell something was off. The air was thick with a sense of dread that she couldn't shake. "What are you doing here, sweetheart?" She took a step toward him, her heart racing. But as she did, the room around her began to fade. The walls seemed to collapse inward, and the very ground beneath her feet began to crumble. "No, Mia, don't look away." Her father's voice echoed, but now it was different, darker, filled with an emotion she couldn't place. The world around her was twisting into something unrecognizable, and the sense of danger in the air grew stronger. The room shattered completely, and Mia was back in the loom room, her body throbbing with pain. She realized with horror that the weaver wasn't just manipulating her memories, it was distorting reality itself. "You see," a voice boomed, its tone chilling and unearthly. The weaver itself had come to life, its form a shifting mass of shadows and threads. "You are part of the tapestry, Mia. You always have been." The final choice. The shadows that surrounded the loom grew tighter, and Mia could feel the weaver's grip on her growing stronger. Every thread was pulling at her, ripping her apart, but at the same time, something deep inside her was beginning to fight back. She had always thought she was weak, that she didn't have the strength to break free. But now, in this moment, she realized something she hadn't before. The weaver wasn't just an outside force. It was inside her, woven into her very being, her thoughts, her memories. But that meant she wasn't powerless. The weaver had woven its threads into her, but it had never owned her. She still had the power to choose. "I am not yours," Mia whispered, her voice trembling but strong. "I will not be part of your tapestry. I will destroy you." With a defiant scream, Mia reached out and grabbed the thread closest to her, feeling the burning sting as it cut through her palm. She pulled with all her might, and as the thread began to unravel, the very fabric of the loom began to shift. The shadows howled, the weaver's presence fading, but Mia knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of the final battle for her soul. She had one chance to escape, one chance to destroy the weaver before it consumed everything. Episode 10. The final unraveling. The loom's end. Mia stood at the heart of the loom, the sprawling tapestry of memories stretching out before her like a vast, incomprehensible maze. The weaver's presence surrounded her, an overwhelming weight that pressed in on her chest and made her pulse race in time with the rhythmic hum of the machine. The last remnants of the world outside the loom felt like they were slipping away, as if the fabric of reality itself was thinning, unraveling. The shadows that had haunted her, the whispers that had followed her, everything now pointed to this moment. She had reached the end. Every step she had taken, every choice she had made, had brought her here, to the loom, to the memory weaver. Her body was exhausted, her mind a tangle of fractured images and distorted truths. But something had shifted. The weaver had been pulling at her for so long, manipulating her memories, controlling her every thought. But now, as she stood before the heart of its power, Mia could feel something else, a strength that hadn't been there before. She was no longer just a victim. She had become aware, and that awareness gave her a power that the weaver could never take away. The loom's spindles turned, the threads shimmering with an eerie glow, weaving together the past, the present, and the future. Every thread was a life, a story, a memory, and Mia knew that each one was hers. Her memories, her experiences, her very essence had become part of this tapestry, woven into the weaver's web. But Mia was no longer willing to be a piece in the weaver's game. The voice of the weaver. "You cannot escape." The voice filled the room, low and steady, echoing from all directions, as if the loom itself was speaking. Mia didn't flinch. She had heard that voice before so many times. It had been woven into the very fabric of her thoughts. But now it was weakening. The more she faced it, the more its grip loosened. "You are mine, Mia Weston," the weaver's voice continued, now growing colder, sharper. "You have always been mine. Your memories, your soul, they belong to me." Mia's hand clenched into a fist as she stood tall before the loom. She could feel the threads tugging at her, pulling her into their dark embrace. The loom was alive. Its tendrils were everywhere, surrounding her like a net of memories, but they couldn't hold her anymore. "No," Mia whispered, her voice steady, filled with a new resolve. "I am not yours. I am my own." The room shuddered, the ground beneath her feet trembling as the weaver's power fought to maintain its hold over her. Mia could feel the tension building, a battle between the weaver's dark influence and the strength of her own will. "You cannot break the weave." The voice was now a snarl, a deep growl of frustration. "You were made for this. I was made to break you," Mia said, her voice rising. Her breath quickened, but her mind was clear. "I am not your puppet. You won't control me any longer." The breaking point. The loom began to shift as Mia moved closer. The threads stretched and twisted, pulsating with a violent energy that surged through the room. The walls seemed to bend with the weight of the loom's power, the room closing in around her. But Mia didn't stop. She stepped forward, her hands reaching for the center of the loom, where the final thread lay, the thread that bound her to the weaver. It was glowing, a faint thread of gold, pulsing with power. Mia's fingers brushed against it, and the moment she made contact, a jolt of energy shot through her body, the sheer force of it nearly knocking her off her feet. The thread was alive, burning with the memories of her past, her pain, and everything she had ever been through. But she didn't let go. The golden thread hummed with life, and Mia felt herself drawn into it, her own memories flashing before her eyes, the good, the bad, the moments she had tried so hard to forget. But now, she could see them for what they truly were, pieces of herself. She wasn't a victim of the weaver. She was the one who had the power to rewrite them. Mia closed her eyes, steadying her breath. This was it, the final choice. to let the weaver consume her, or to tear the fabric apart. With a single motion, Mia yanked the thread from the loom. The sound of ripping fabric filled the air as the threads began to unravel, the very structure of the loom shaking violently. The unraveling as the loom's threads began to snap. The world around Mia seemed to break apart. The weaver's power was falling, crumbling under the weight of its own creation. The shadows that had once surrounded her now shrank back, the oppressive force lifting from her mind. The memories that had been stolen, the pieces of her life that had been twisted and distorted, all began to return to their rightful place. Mia felt the weight of each one settling into her mind like a puzzle finally coming together. But it wasn't just her memories. Everyone's memories began to return. The lost souls, the victims of the weaver, all of them were freeing themselves from its control. As the loom disintegrated, Mia watched as the very fabric of Ravensworth shifted. The town, once enslaved by the weaver's influence, began to return to normal, the fog lifting, the shadows receding. The weaver was crumbling, its power vanishing like smoke in the wind. But it wasn't just the town that was changing. Mia felt herself changing too, her mind clearing, her heart lighter as the grip of the weaver lifted from her. She could breathe again. She was free. The final confrontation. But as the weaver's power waned, there was still one more thing. Mia had to face the weaver itself. It had been hidden all along, but now, in the final moments, its true form was emerging. The shadow of the weaver was unlike anything Mia had seen before. It was dark, a swirling mass of threads and memories, a shape that seemed to bend and shift with every passing second. But this time, Mia wasn't afraid. She was no longer the victim. She was the destroyer. The weaver's dark eyes met hers, and Mia could feel the weight of its centuries-old hatred. But she was no longer powerless. She had taken back what was hers. The weaver spoke, its voice ragged, its tone laced with venom. "You think you've won? You cannot break me. You were always part of me." "I am not yours," Mia replied, her voice firm. "I never was." With a final decisive movement, Mia raised her hand and shattered the weaver. The shadow unraveled, its power breaking apart, its hold on the town and on her finally severed. The rebirth. The world around Mia shifted once more, and this time, it wasn't the darkness that enveloped her. It was the light. The air felt cleaner, the town more vibrant, the shadows finally gone. The weaver's influence had been erased, and Mia had reclaimed her freedom. As the last threads of the weaver's power disintegrated, Mia stood in the center of Ravensworth, breathing in the fresh air of a world that was finally free. The curse was broken. The weaver was gone, and Mia was finally at peace. The end.